All right. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are, whoever you are. This is Dr. Patrick Lockwood coming back to you live. And I thought it would be helpful if we could talk about porn because I think it's a pretty big deal nowadays. And there's so much to say because it's not a simple or straightforward topic. But before I get going talking about pornography, happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. And I'm not going to waste anyone's time or, let's say, uh, go outside of my scope. Just want to, let's say, drop a note or make a statement that I feel terrible for the people who lost their lives in Christ Church. And I'm not going to make any statements about the people who were engaged in violence or religion or anything of that nature because it's not my job. And I think it's a waste of time to talk about it in depth personally, especially in my profession. So that's just my take on that. But again, my condolences to everyone who lost someone. It's a tough thing. Okay. I think that's about it. Again, some of the reason why I'm doing this talk on pornography is because of what I wrote in my book, The Fear Problem. It's definitely a good read. It's worth reading. Check it out. It's available on Amazon. It's available at Mascot Books, and it's available at www.patricklockwoodhealing.com/books.html. And I wrote extensively in the book about why technology is somewhat problematic and it's kind of hijacking our mind. And I think pornography is no different in terms of its capacity to take an instinctual process or a number of instinctual processes and hijack them, twist them, and kind of pervert them, so to speak. I know that might sound like harsh language, but it's not intended to be so. So, 3 caveats before I get going. And by the way, there's already a video I made on sex and sexuality and stuff like that. Please go check it out. It's about a year ago. I think it's me wearing a blue shirt. So go for it. And I hope to not be redundant. So if I am, I apologize. But again, 3 caveats about this video. First, this video is not a purely anti-pornography speech or argument. That is not my goal. My goal is not to shame anyone. My goal is not to badmouth pornography, porn stars, or anything of that nature. I'm actually acquaintances with a few people in the sex work industry. So that's nothing personal, obviously. Second, before I get into the scientific literature, the literature is not perfectly clear. There is no perfect consensus on the maladaptive or adaptive nature of pornography in the scientific literature in terms of psychology, neuroscience, and social psychology. And just so all of you are aware, all the kind of fact-based statements that I'm going to be making in terms of how it affects the brain, our emotions, our psychology, are all from studies that are no older than 6 years old. So it's very recent research. I have stuff from 2019, published this year. I have stuff from 2015, 2014, nothing older than that. So I'm not pulling from the 80s. Again, the research is not perfectly conclusive. So there's a mixture of research literature that I'm working on, and then there's a mixture, in that mixture, there's also some assertions that I'm making based upon my understanding of evolutionary psychology and kind of the design of our striatum and our seeking system, as Jaak Panksepp calls it, more broadly. So there's some assertions mixed in with some research, and I'll do my best to be perfectly clear about which is an assertion and which is more of what the literature actually says. Third, I'm well aware that much of the research I'm citing was performed on males. literature and the research done on compulsive sexual behavior and pornography use is predominantly done on males, to my knowledge. So I'm aware that there is a sex bias to the research that I'm discussing. So those are the three caveats. This is not an anti-porn speech. Secondarily, I understand that the literature is what it is. And third, I understand that the literature is predominantly done on males. Not that there's no research with females, but it's predominantly with males. So pornography, the kind of viewing of sexual stimuli, whether it's pictures or videos or virtual reality, whatever it is, that's porn. I don't think I need to explain that any further. I read somewhere that pornography is a $97 billion industry. And my general assertion is that pornography might reinforce some unhelpful or primitive attitudes about sex. That's my first assertion. It's not a fact. Second, people in my profession, in academia, have been talking about pornography since at least the 80s. But the research has taken off in the last couple of decades because of the internet and because of access to porn and all that good stuff. And it's taken off like wildfire. So before I get into any of the actual research, just some interesting stats and facts, and I'll post the links to where I got these from. So Pornhub is kind of the biggest, most well-known, most well-used pornography consumption website. And in 2017, they claimed they had 28.5 total visits, which is 81 million visits a day, 4 million an hour, 56,000 visits a minute. And there are about 25 billion searches in 2017. That's about 800 searches per second. Pornhub says that its audience is 75% male, 25% female. And that differs depending upon the scientific literature that you read, because some studies, females report consuming a fairly equal amount of pornography compared to males, but that's just Pornhub's kind of data, so it's one source, obviously. Other estimates of pornography show that it's 90% male consumption, 10% female. It's hard to say, but it's, I think, probably a fair assertion that more males consume pornography than females. That would be my guess. Other important stats, and I'll post a link to this where this comes from as well. 64% of young people aged 13 to 24 actively seek out pornography weekly or more frequently. I want you to let that sit into your mind. Teenagers, young adults, over 64% of them report weekly consumption of pornography or more frequently. What's also interesting is that the teen category of pornography searches has been at the top of the charts for the past few years, which says something about where we're at, I think. And in 2018, Pornhub reported there were 5.5 billion hours of porn consumed and 33.5 billion visits on the site. So it actually, if you go back to the previous stat, in 2017 there were 28.5 billion visits, and in 2018 there were 33.5 billion visits. So consumption is going up, apparently. And there's a whole world of child pornography that I'm not even going to get into, but it's a worthwhile thing to think about. So I think I'll just leave that comment there, but it's a worthwhile topic to discuss, but not at this time, at least. So those are the basic overview stats. I think I read somewhere that young females, like adolescent females, consume more pornography than young adult females, so like 22 to 26 or whatever. So apparently that trend goes down as you get older. So what does the psychology and neuroscience literature say about pornography and how it affects the brain, our psychology, our motivation for in real life sexual relationships? These are important questions to answer. And I'll do my best to answer them. So I've got a number of studies here, and I've read through them as best as I can. And one of the common themes I find in the studies that I've read here is that men who are seeking treatment for problematic pornography use have a obvious and distinguishable difference in their sensitivity to sexual cues compared to healthy males who do not have a problematic porn use kind of self-report issue. Secondarily, men who report having problematic sexual compulsive behavior also report a decrease in sensitivity to real-life sexual partners compared to males who do not report having a porn problem. Also, the research generally shows that men who report having a problematic or excessive consumption of pornography tend to struggle with not being as sensitive to real-life rewards like money and status and things like that, which is interesting because you would think that, that would still be a big deal to people, but I guess it's not the case, where the sex becomes this visual stimulation of a sexual material, whether it's a picture or a video, overtakes your capacity to be rewarded, so to speak, by other things. Another interesting study I read showed that compulsive or chronic or problematic users of pornography, especially males, show substantial differences in their brain compared to healthy controls. So what they found, or what a lot of the studies, the more recent neuroscience studies from about 2015 to present have found, is that men in particular who report problematic pornography use or compulsive pornography use have an overly sensitive ventral striatum. This is part of the brain that's responsible for compulsively engaging in behavior or seeking out things, the seeking system in Panksepp's words, for things that are good for our survival, like food, status, wealth, all that good stuff. And what they also find is that men who report problematic or compulsive pornography use have a disconnect to their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex or their anterior orbital frontal cortex. And these are areas of the brain responsible for kind of behavioral control, feeling quote unquote connected to people, attuned to people, and for self-monitoring. So essentially, the excessive consumption of pornography can deregulate or dysregulate your ability to actually have a self-monitoring, self-controlled way of interacting when it comes to viewing sexual stimuli. So you become more impulsive and compulsive. And this is a very similar set of kind of brain changes that you would see in someone with addiction. And I can say that unabashedly. The neuroscience literature on addiction is very straightforward, with an overactive ventral striatum and other parts of the dopamine-based seeking system, and underactive frontal cortex areas like the anterior orbital frontal cortex, or a hijacked orbital frontal cortex. So essentially, excessive pornography does impact our neural architecture. It changes gray matter, and it changes cue specificity, to use scientific terms. And I'll post all those sources in the caption. Another interesting study shows that internet pornography use in males is correlated to sexual dysfunction. However, I found a great, very intensive, very comprehensive review that showed that the link is not causal. So it's not to say that if you watch pornography, you will absolutely have erectile dysfunction or something like that. What it shows, broadly speaking, is that men who reported problematic use, specifically, or compulsive use of pornography, were more likely, in a correlational sense, to have erectile dysfunction. So it's a correlational, not causal relationship, first and foremost. And secondarily, it's not for all males who use a lot of pornography. It's for those who report problematically using pornography. Now, again, there aren't as many studies on this particular topic, so it's worth kind of being very thoughtful about if you yourself consume a lot of porn. But I'll post those references in the caption. Please read them because they're very well done. Another interesting study showed that internet pornography results in a decrease insensitivity to real-life sexual stimuli. And it's actually separate from real-life sexual urges and desires. So your urge and desire for pornography consumption is actually separate from your real-life desire for sexual behavior with real partners, which is interesting. So your brain is learning to, let's say, separate and differentiate between sexual visual stimuli like porn versus, a real life person whom you're attracted to. And I'll be right back. Right back. All right. Sorry for the interruption. So, back to porn, because what's more fun than porn? Okay. And just so I can prove that I'm not cherry picking the literature just to talk about all the negative parts of pornography, there was a great review article that was done in 2014 by Lay and colleagues, Ley, and it kind of surveyed all of the literature that they could think of up to about 2014. And this review article found that there was a great deal of diversity in the literature on compulsive sexual behavior or compulsive pornography use, and that it essentially was not a very straightforward correlation between you will have a problem and it will hijack your brain if you watch pornography. They also thought that the reason why certain people would report problematic or compulsive pornography use could actually be accounted for by other issues, not just the fact that pornography itself is neurologically hijacking. Now, it's definitely true to say that pornography is very, very kind of visually stimulating and overly intensive for the brain. It's totally true. However, not everyone is the same vulnerability or sensitivity to that particular stimuli for a variety of reasons. So Lay and colleagues figured out that maybe there are other factors such as sensation seeking, which is a psychological concept related to your kind of baseline desire to engage in kind of immediate gratification behaviors that are hedonistically pleasurable. Or another factor such as moral incongruence. And the moral incongruence theory of compulsive sexual behavior or pornography basically states or posits that religious or morally induced shame about sexual behavior that is not for procreation, etc., results in negative emotional states. And we are designed to, let's say, overreact or counter-react to manage negative emotional states. And because pornography is so, let's say, emotionally relieving, stress-reducing, that people will get in this nasty, vicious cycle of feeling ashamed, coping with pornography to kind of feel better about it. And it will go on and on and on, so that essentially this vicious cycle gets out of control. So the theory is the more, let's say, morally bad it is to consume pornography, the more shame you feel when you do, but because it's an extremely negative affective state, and pornography is let's say, the exact opposite of that affective state, it allows us to feel relief. So we will do it to gain relief. And the people that have more shame are more likely to report problematic pornography use. They're more guilty when they consume pornography, so to speak. One of the assertions made in this 2014 article by Lay and colleagues is that, there's a growing treatment industry in the psychology profession, the addiction profession, to treat people with sexual behavior that is compulsive, whether it's pornography or like in real life sex. And that might be one of the motivations why so many people are researching it nowadays, which is probably true. There's probably a financial gain in a lot of the research sectors, but at the same time, you can also explain the excessive use of compulsive or of pornography with something like, the trait of impulsivity, or, essentially, what the research basically shows is that males who score higher on the trait of impulsivity struggle more with pornography. So there are a variety of psychological concepts to explain why certain people might struggle, whereas others would not. And a lot of the literature that is on the like more cautious side of the porn is bad debate kind of points to those psychological concepts and says, wait a second, maybe it's not bad for everyone, or maybe not everyone uses it problematically. Now, I would again suggest that you read any of these resources I'm about to post in the caption, because I think being a more well-informed person is always good for your life. There's no downside to that other than time wasted. So definitely please read the article I will link in the caption about that kind of critiques the pure brain addiction model of pornography, which talks about the moral incongruence theory. Regardless, though, what's interesting in that critique article is that the authors indicate that problematic pornography use, whether it's morally induced or neuroadaptively induced, should be addressed anyways, because we don't want people to be suffering unnecessarily. Like, there's stress and there's psychosocial impairment because of their porn use, so they need treatment. So it's not that people don't need treatment, it's just that we want to make sure we conceptualize it correctly so we're not further shaming people. So what are some takeaways? What are some simple takeaways? Porn seems to have a very strong effect on the brain. I think that statement is a fair statement, whether you're pro-porn or anti-porn. I think it's a fair statement that has a very strong effect on the brain. And the second takeaway is that for a number of people, it might be a problem in terms of the fact that it's hijacking your brain in an addictive capacity. It's a fair statement. Not everyone, but for many people. Third takeaway, it might lead to the devaluing of real-life sexual experiences for a number of people, especially if you consume it consistently or excessively. So those are three takeaways from the literature. There might be a moral problem there too, which is another thing to take away from the literature. That's a fourth takeaway. So people might have a kind of moral incongruence problem, and that might drive them to, struggle more with their pornography use. And apparently lots of people consume pornography. Lots. Here's the problem, in my mind, and this is where my bias is going to show, and I'm going to try and be very straightforward about my bias. We have a very unique situation as humans, as mammals, where we obviously have sex to procreate, and then we obviously have sex to have pleasure, and we obviously have sex to deal with stress. Those are the three most common kind of evolutionary reasons why mammals have sex: procreation, enjoyment, and stress management. Another, if you read like different anthropological data sets, you'll see that certain types of chimps have different kinds of sex, certain types of monkeys have different kinds of sex. Like, if you read Franz de Waal's research, I think it's bonobos who have sex on every occasion. So they have sex to say hello, they have sex to say goodbye, they have sex to resolve disputes, like make-up sex, etc. But that's not every monkey species. That's only one group of people, or one group of primates, so to speak. So we have this weird, in my opinion, and by weird I don't mean like morally bad or judgmental. I just think we have this unique and complex set of variables psychologically and socially and instinctually that push us to have sex as humans. And I can perfectly understand why many people might consume pornography to deal with stress at the end of the long day, or to deal with loneliness, right? There's a number of very valid reasons why people might consume pornography, because I don't want to shame anyone. I also think at the exact same time, despite the fact that those emotional reasons are valid because they activate our instinctual processes that say go emotionally and physically connect with someone, because again, stress, separation distress, and loneliness are supposed to push us to go connect with people. And one of the most intense, wonderful, confusing ways that we connect with people is through physical intimacy and sex, which is great. However, are we supposed to manage every moment of loneliness, intense loneliness, with pornography. I don't know about that. I don't know that that's good for us. Secondarily, I also find myself wondering if maybe the use of pornography, broadly speaking, will help desensitize us to real life sexual rewards. So, like, would it be a fair statement to say, and I don't know this because the literature is not perfectly clear on this, that the average person who consumes pornography is, let's say, less really interested in having a partner to have sex with? I don't know. It'd be good to know, but I don't know. Like the review article that I want you all to read, I'll post a link, talks about that broadly. There's studies with college kids and others, and it basically shows that kids who consume porn still have regular relationships and don't have serious relationship issues, but there's so many social and cultural variables, it's hard to weigh it all out. I bet pornography used here on the West Coast, like in LA, looks totally different than it would in the Midwest or on the East Coast or in the South. Like, I bet it's totally different. What I know is we are definitely designed to be stimulated by visual experiences of sexual arousal. So, like, we're supposed to be excited when we see an attractive person. We're supposed to be excited when someone is flirting with us. We're supposed to be excited when someone's engaging in like sexual congress with us. We're supposed to be excited for all those reasons. And the problem with pornography is it makes us, in my opinion, I think pornography makes us lazy, from what I can tell. Like this immediate gratification way of dealing with sexual urges, like 60 years ago, if you really wanted to get laid and you really wanted to get off, so to speak, you had to work pretty hard. You had to take people on dates. You had to hopefully not get rejected the first time you asked someone out, etc. It took more time to go from A to Z, so to speak. And now with pornography, every moment that we would like to not feel alone, every moment that we would like to feel powerful through sex, or every moment that we would like to feel happy or intimate, every moment that we would like to do any of those normal things that most human beings would like to do to have sex, now we can do it within a matter of seconds. I don't necessarily know that that's good for us. Again, this is not an anti-porn speech. I'm not here bad-mouthing anyone who participates and uses pornography, anyone who makes pornography. I'm not an anti-porn guy. I simply kind of, in the whole like individual responsibility train of thought, want people to take a second to think about how they view pornography, why they view pornography. Is it having an impact on their interest in real life people? Are they using it to cope? Because even though human beings are 100% designed to have sex to cope with negative emotional states, I am not necessarily sure that porn is the answer for that. So I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on this, because I honestly am not 100% sure. I really am not sure. But I find myself slightly concerned with the fact that, at least according to Pornhub's data, the use of pornography is going up. So, I don't know, folks. I welcome any and all comments. I appreciate, Shannon, who's been commenting here on the live chat. There are definitely a lot of good reasons to be wary about, having sex nowadays. Lots of STDs, lots of people lying, etc. But I think there's a difference between how we're designed, how society works, what's normal and expectable, and where we wish to be as humans. And I'm not 100% sure what that looks like. But I think it's worth an ongoing discussion. And from the literature that I've cited today, at least, it seems like consuming it on an excessive basis definitely is not good for us. Obviously, there's the caveats I mentioned earlier, but seems like a problem. Well, that's all I can think of. It's definitely worth thinking about, and I hope you all treat your sex life with compassion and responsibility, because life is short, and obviously sex is one of the best and most fun things we can do. It's also one of the most confusing and awkward things we can do too, which is part of what makes it fun. So take it seriously. This is your life. You get one of them, I think, pretty sure. And you've got a choice about what you do with your body. And what are you missing out on not having real sex for? Why do you have to use porn? This is something I've struggled with too. Like, what are the ups and downs? What's the pros and cons? And it's a tough thing to think about, but I definitely think that if I were to make a bottom line recommendation for the average person, it's, well, maybe real life sex is better than porn for you. Or at the very least, maybe just using your fantasy life, your internal fantasy life, your imagination would be better than pornography, given the fact that your imagination is not going to be quite as hijacking for your ventral striatum, etc. I don't know. But anyways, I've rambled for as long as I possibly can. I hope you all have a great rest of your Sunday. Please, please, please go get The Fear Problem. I would very much appreciate it. $9 on Amazon, a little bit more expensive at Mascot Books or my website. So go get it. It's good for you. It'll help you understand your fear process better. It'll help you argue less. If you'd like to have less conflict, get the book. It'll be worth it. Anyways, have a good day, and I will probably talk to you again in a week.